thank you for the opportunity to address you today. I don't feel that you're an audience. I feel you're my brothers. And I know each one of you quite well. So God bless you. Assalamu alaikum. I want to say today that a little bit about my life. I had a PowerPoint presentation. The electricity went off last night. I lost everything. I don't know where it is. It's not in my laptop, but we had a very professional PowerPoint presentation about Muslim Voice for Peace and reconciliation. So I'm going to describe to you in a few words what was in the PowerPoint presentation, and I will describe each slide to you, each picture. My life started off in Charleston, South Carolina. My dad was a U.S. Navy pilot. He died in a crash when I was 3 months old. I had two brothers and a sister, much older than I. But by the time I was 3 years old, my mother moved the whole family to North Georgia, which was her original hometown, Jefferson, Georgia. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. This is the largest denomination in the southern part of the United States. A Christian Protestant church called the Southern Baptist Church. It was organized during slavery. The Baptists were one denomination throughout the United States, but the Southern Baptists broke away from the Northern Baptists during the Civil War because they supported slavery. White Christians supporting slavery. This was the life I grew up in. I grew up in a very poor section of the town. I had no father. My mother worked as a waitress serving tables in a restaurant. And I lived on what the wealthy white people called Rat Road. It bordered on the black section of the town. There was a black section and a more middle-class, wealthy white section. That's where I grew up. When I went out to the street to play with kids, all my friends were black. I grew up in this condition, which would later benefit me greatly, because I learned to appreciate and to love people not because of the color of their skin, because of what was in their heart. My schooling, I was a committed Christian even at the age of 9. I walked the aisle of the church and gave my life, said I was a born-again Christian. I would go to memorizing Bible verses. In our public school at that time, we had to memorize Bible verses. This was public school. Now in America, you can't even mention God. But the first hour of every class was used in reciting Bible verses to the teacher, and we would get rewards, pictures to hang on the wall or bookmarks. And the biggest reward for those who memorized the most was a week at Children's Bible Mission Camp in Crawfordville, Georgia. I would go from there to Christian High School, a boarding school in South Carolina. Was paid for by my dad's retirement. He was U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy paid for me to go to a Christian high school. U.S. Navy paid for me to go to Christian college. And I went to Shelton College, where I majored in biblical studies and theology. From there, I went to Faith Theological Seminary, a Presbyterian school in Philadelphia. From there to Liberty Baptist Theological Seminary in Lynchburg, Virginia. I don't know if you've heard the name Jerry Falwell, very conservative fundamentalist Christian. During high school, after high school, and while I was doing undergraduate work at Shelton College, I would spend my summers working in France, and at the end of each summer, hitchhiking to different countries. I wanted to know about different countries and why people thought the way they thought. I understood this because when I got to Bob Jones Academy in the South, Greenville, South Carolina, I read in the history book on American history that the U.S. Civil War was fought over states' rights. In other words, every state had the right to decide its own policies and its own future. And of course, they were choosing slavery. When I got to the north, in Cape May, New Jersey, where Shelton College was located, I saw the same history book in someone's home. High school history book, History of America, same publisher, same cover, and I opened it up to the section on the American Civil War. And it said the Civil War was fought over slavery, against slavery. That's why we fought. So all of a sudden, I'm seeing two different sides of an issue. I realize that there's more than one side on every decision, every issue. When I went to France the first summer to work, I hitchhiked to Germany. I wanted to know why the German people followed Hitler. And I stayed in homes this was in 1967, 66, 67, 68, and 69. The first summer I stayed in the home of Detlef Biesecker, who was the senior editor of Der Spiegel magazine in Germany. It was a business magazine. From there, I went into Eastern Europe. That's where I met my wife in Czechoslovakia. She was my interpreter in a Baptist church there. So I kept going farther and farther east until I got to the Soviet Union. And when I was 21, I traveled into the Soviet Union because I was interested in the plight of Christians and Jews and Muslims in the Soviet Union. I wanted to know what they were suffering, what they were experiencing under communism. I found out. They arrested me. I was in jail. I was put in jail for smuggling Bibles. So I had quite a diverse education, and a lot of my education was simply through traveling. I also studied at National Taiwan University in Taipei, Asian Studies, in Moscow, Russian language, Central Florida University, and then on to a philosophical school in Huemo, Switzerland. I'm very grateful to God for all of the experiences, but the greatest experiences I ever had, now you see this slide here, this picture. This is a picture of this book. It's called the Quran. Quran with references to the Bible. I met Dr. Safi Kaskas. I went on to be involved in politics, by the way, in Maryland. I was on the Annapolis, Maryland. Annapolis is the capital of the state of Maryland. I was on the Annapolis City Council for a number of years. I was the head of the Democratic Party in Annapolis, Maryland for 8 years, and then went on to run for mayor. When I ran for mayor, all hell broke loose. You know, American politics is very, very dirty. Politics is not so clean here in South Africa either, from what I'm reading in the newspaper. Even your best friends turn on you and attack you and trap you and try to cause problems for you. So I ran for mayor, and by the time I finished, I was ready for psychiatric hospital. You know, I was the kind of person that wanted people to think well of him, who wanted to do good things and wanted people to say nice things about him and to give him credit for what he was doing. I worked with the poorest of the poor in my city. I worked in the African and American neighborhoods. 20% of the population of Annapolis were African American, and they lived in public housing in very squalid, dirty conditions. I would try to get churches and synagogues and mosques to adopt different African American housing communities. And we would match them up, and the volunteers from those churches and mosques and synagogues would go into those communities, help kids after school with their homework. They would tutor them in different subjects, math, English, history, whatever they needed. And it was a great success. But then I met Dr. Safi Kaskas. Dr. Safi Kaskas was working on this project involving the Quran. He'd been working on it for several years. A new translation into contemporary modern American English. We don't call it a translation, we call it an interpretation of the Quran. And he asked me if I would come to Saudi Arabia. Now, I had left the United States once a year ever since I was 18 years old. But I'd never been into an Islamic country. So this was my opportunity. I went to Saudi Arabia with great fear and trepidation because my friends in the U.S. Navy told me that I was putting my life in harm's way. And when I arrived in Saudi Arabia, I would either get kidnapped or somebody would cut my throat. So when I hit the ground in Jeddah, I was nervous. Someone picked me up at the airport, took me to where I was staying. It was a room in the office building where Dr. Safi and others were working on this project. 3 days passed. I was shown a room where I was to sleep. 3 days passed. I asked Dr. Safi if someone could take me to the supermarket, if his driver was there. Most business people in Saudi Arabia have a car and driver. Says, can your driver take me to the supermarket? I would like to buy some groceries. And he went to the window and he pointed, it's right over there. It's called Manuel. You can walk there. I said, how am I going to walk? Somebody's going to kidnap me. It's not safe. And he looked at me and he laughed and he says, you're going to be mighty hungry in this country. I walked. People would pass me. I would look to the right and I would look to the left. I was afraid somebody was going to attack me, but nobody did. In the supermarket, people would smile at me and they would try to make conversation. They would reach their hand out and they would shake my hand and say, where are you from? And I would nervously say, you know, I'm American. And you know what they did? They hugged me. Welcome. Ahlan wa sahlan. That wasn't what I was expecting. But the greatest changes began to take place as I worked on this. I wasn't there to do any translation work. I didn't speak Arabic then. I speak very little Arabic now. But I started reading the translation. And I had a notepad and I would write down hundreds and hundreds of questions about Quran, about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, about things I was hearing, things I was seeing, most of all, just reading. And as I wrote down the questions, every morning I would sit with Dr. Kaskas and others, and I would say, what does this mean? What does that mean? Can this be worded better? And they would say, yes, good point, we'll change the wording. Or they would say, no, that's not what it means this, and then I would have understanding and my knowledge began to grow. But as my knowledge of the Quran grew, my life changed forever. I read in one place that there are those amongst the Christians and the Jews, people of the book, who are Muslim. And when they began to read the Quran, or they began to hear the Quran being recited, and they have knowledge and understanding, they began to say, Wallahi, I'm a Muslim. I'm a Muslim. There are millions of people like that in the world today. This is who I was. After 6 months, I walked down the street to Masjid Taqwa. I have one beautiful picture of Masjid Taqwa here on the screen. Do you see it? A beautiful mosque. You can see the people outside who are my friends. Shafiq Zabur. I knocked on the door. I stood there knocking for 10 minutes. I later found out you don't knock on the door of a mosque, you just open it and go in. Nobody stands there knocking. But I didn't know what to do. I'd asked Dr. Safi if he could take me to a mosque, but he wouldn't say yes and he wouldn't say no, and I think he was afraid that I was going to cause a problem for him. Christian in a mosque? But after standing there for 10 minutes, Shafiq Zubir, who is a muazzin, came to the door. He said, "May I help you?" And I said, "Yes, my name is Samuel Shropshire. I'm a Christian from the United States. Is it okay if I come inside the mosque?" Shafiq hugged me. And he said, "Sure, come in. Ahlan wa sahlan." He showed me where I could sit in the back of the mosque. And I would go there for 3 days for all 5 prayers, just watching people kneeling, prostrating themselves to the floor, saying words in Arabic that I didn't understand. But I felt God's presence there. And I said to Shafiq, "Can you please teach me to pray like a Muslim? I wanted to be with them." And he said, "Of course." And he would give me a ride to the supermarket, or he would take me here or there. And while we were riding in the car, he would teach me Al-Fatiha. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Elohim Malik Yawmiddin Iyaka na'budu Iyaka nasta'in Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Amen. A few days later, I asked if I could say Al-Shahada, and I was taken to the Islamic Education Foundation, Al-Hamra. Dr. Sadiq Malki led me in saying Al-Shahada, and I declared myself a Muslim. Now, people in Saudi Arabia today ask me, "How did you become Muslim?" And I relate that information to them, but I have to say it began in Jefferson, Georgia, when I was just 3 and 4 years old. My mother would take me to the First Baptist Church of Jefferson, and she would put me there. She would take me to the pew. I would sit. I would listen to the sermon. I was very bored. I was like any other kid, 3 or 4 years old. She would have to slap my hand and tell me to